Poets second Thursday workshop. I'm Kathy. I think most of you know me. And I am gonna just turn it right over to C Liegh to lead us.
So, hello everyone. It is. I am so happy to be back with you guys again. I don't know, Ms. Dana, if I need to be pinned because I want to share my screen. So I don't know if pinning me will help. That way, we'll center the sharing of the screen. But I had so much fun and so much joy the last time that when Ms. Dana asked if I could come back, if myself and Dr. Miller would come back, it was a no-brainer for me because writing or not, I like to be where there's good energy because good energy leads to good writing. And so I'm going to do a very brief presentation that's going to end with you guys doing some writing on the prompt, and it's called image journaling. And so I'll give you some insight to how I came to get into image journaling. And before I start sharing my screen, I'm pretty much certain that the vast majority of us on this screen do some type of journaling, right? We've all done some type of journaling. We all know that journaling is it's not just for those of us who want to publish, just journaling for life and for release and for self-evaluation always works. So journaling is why we all do it. Now, I'm going to now admit something that as a writer, I was pretty arrogant about for many years and realized, how bad I should have felt about it. I never journaled. And the reason I never journaled was because I always had ideas for writing. So I was just always writing poems and short stories. I don't remember after the age of 6 not writing something every day. The only 2 things I've ever wanted to do in my life, one was play shortstop for the Cincinnati Reds, and the other was be a writer. It was the only 2 things that I've ever wanted to do. I want to tell a story about a student asking me about Mr. McInnis, why do they call him the New York Football Giants? And I had to tell him, I said, because the San Francisco Giants baseball team used to be in New York. And all the students looked at me like, first they looked at me like, God, Mr. McInnis, are you that old to know that? 2, they had no idea that the Giants used to be in New York. But so baseball was a love of mine. I'm actually a third generation baseball player. My grandfather barnstormed in the Negro Leagues. I want to be clear, he didn't play in the Negro Leagues, but he participated in barnstorming. So I never had to journal. I was writing poems, writing short stories all my life. And then, let's see, 13 years from 2017 would have been around 2004. 2006, I had something monumental happen in my personal life. And for the first time in my life, I could not write. And again, sometimes life lets you know not only how arrogant you are, but how foolish you are. I didn't understand the concept of writer's block. I just didn't. I'll be completely honest with you. Whenever someone said that they had writer's block, I would say to myself, that person doesn't read, or that person doesn't read enough. Because that's what I thought. I thought that if you were reading and engaged in life, how could you have writer's block? Well, what I didn't realize is that writer's block is a lot about what's happening in our personal life. It's not about how much we're reading, not about how intelligent we are. It's about those things that we are engaging on a daily basis that is stopping because we're thinking about other things that's limiting our ability to turn it into writing. So that's why I joined all the normal people and had something happen in my life that I could not write. And because I was not a journaler, I had no way to deal with it. So had I been journaling all those years, right, doing what we know writers should do. So at a moment when the faucet just completely stopped, I had all of these things, because as writers, as you know, one thing I tell people is that those of us who are writers, we're writers because the video game in our head doesn't stop. The movie never goes off. And so because the video game never stops, because the movie never ends, we are constantly having to write because we will explode, both literally and figuratively. So I then started thinking, okay, what can I do? Because I have these thoughts, I have these issues, I have these personal things with which I'm dealing. And I'd never written from a personal space as well, being a kind of social political writer. I never written from a really completely personal space. But I knew that as a poet and a short story writer, my prime directive or my prime focus was always around the image, right? I am not a literal poet or a literal short story writer. I tend to be moved by poems and short stories that are driven by imagery and that are holistically symbolic. I want the metaphoric. I want the figurative. I want the poem to mean multiple things. I want the short story to mean multiple things. And so what I decided to do was, let me practice crafting images about the personal things in my life that's keeping me from writing. That was the only way that I could do it. And what I found, and then I'm going to share my screen, is that doing it that way, turning my personal pain into images, was the best way for me to actually analyze what was happening in my life. And I won't get into what was happening, but what I realized is that one of the problems for me was that I was conflating two things. You know, like we often have multiple things happen in our life, and because they're happening simultaneously, we think they're connected. And when I had to realize, right, through these images, I realized, oh, they're not connected at all. And my problem is that I'm trying to solve them together. I'm trying to solve them simultaneously when they're two separate things that need two different solutions. Does that make sense? And so it was through crafting the images of my feelings and what I was engaging is what gave me the clarity to do that. So now I'll share my screen and get into, and so you guys let me know if you can see, let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, so good. So we're going to do, again, this presentation is image journaling. And so what I'm going to do is, I like to have crowd participation. So I'm going to ask if someone would unmute themselves and read for me the first block, our definition of image journaling, if you don't mind. Anybody?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Image journaling is the act of taking an entire day, week, month, or semester or two, or three, most important moments of those periods and signifying it with an image.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dees. And so what the goal is with image journaling, which is separate from, say, just regular journaling, is that rather than trying to write down every thought of everything that happened, what image journaling attempts to do is capture the overarching feeling or the overarching response, either to a moment of our day or to the entire day or to a moment of our week or the entire week or the month or the semester. Because what we're really trying to do with image journaling is capture two things: how we feel and why we feel. And when I say capture how we feel and why we feel, particularly when I'm dealing with younger people, you know, I tend to teach two groups of people. I teach college students and advanced high school students. But I think that this lesson can everybody, because I tell my students, the old saying is there's no fool like an old fool. So just because I'm older, another thing I tell young people is age is not the only parent to wisdom, right? So just because you're older doesn't necessarily make you wise. But what image journaling allows us to do is not only identify our specific emotions, but it also allows us to identify the difference between a primary and a secondary emotion. And what I mean when I say primary and secondary emotion, a secondary emotion is an emotion that cannot exist without another emotion. So I'll give you an example. Anger is a secondary emotion. That is, anger only exists after you've experienced another emotion, a primary emotion, whether it's fear or guilt or sorrow. So fear, guilt, sorrow, embarrassment, those all lead to anger. And the problem is, because we are not taught things such as mindfulness and we're not taught to really evaluate ourselves, we never ask ourselves, why am I angry? Because if we are taught to ask ourselves, if we know that anger is a secondary emotion, and we ask ourselves, why am I angry? Then we're able to move through or beyond the anger to get to either the guilt or the embarrassment or the sorrow to deal with the root of the anger as opposed. So that's why in image journaling, the point is to think about what is the what is the most essential or most primary emotion that you felt in that moment or that day or that week. So let me go to the next page. And so let me get someone to read where it says fosters critical thinking. Someone unmute themselves and read that statement for us. Yes, go ahead, Art. Mr. Art, please.
Benefits of image journaling. Fosters critical thinking. While this is designed to be fun, image journaling nurtures critical thinking because it requires one to do more than remember a day's, weeks, months, or semester's events. It requires one to evaluate the meaning and significance of those events to craft that meaning into an image.
Thank you so much. And so we'll come back next, but I want to say a little bit something about that. And that's where we understand, particularly as poets, right? As poets, vocabulary and wordplay are more critical to the poets because what we're ultimately trying to do is craft the perfect word for the perfect image to clearly or effectively articulate the thought or emotion. And so this is the critical thinking aspect, because what we're really trying to do is make meaning, right? What does Wordsworth tell us? The job of the poet is make the familiar unfamiliar so that we can re-recognize it. So the job of the poet with image journaling is to think consciously about not just how I feel what I feel, but what does the feeling mean? Because if you understand just the feeling, but not the meaning of the feeling, you won't really craft an effective image. That is, it's one thing to feel disappointment, but do we understand why we are disappointed? Because if we don't understand why we're disappointed, then our image may not encompass everything that it needs to. It's one thing to feel betrayal. It's one thing to feel rejection. But the question is, why are we feeling rejection? And if we understand the why we're feeling rejection, that allows us to create an even more clear and effective image. So that's what we mean by critical thinking. Writing is an act of critical thinking. Then it gets us to fosters emotional self-analysis and awareness. So let me get someone to unmute themselves and read that statement.
Okay, I'll do
Yes,
it. Moreover, this process becomes an exercise in emotional analysis as one learns to be more cognizant of one's emotions, enabling one to recognize and manage one's emotions, promoting emotional maturity, self-awareness, mindfulness, and sanity.
Thank you so much. This process helps us to better know ourselves because it doesn't allow us to reject or ignore or suppress what we feel. The problem, particularly because most of us, the problem with being people who accomplish things, right? Whatever it is, you accomplish in your personal life, your professional life, one of the things that we do to accomplish goals is that we deny what we consider insignificant or petty emotions. We deny things that keep us from being productive. So if we feel a little down, if we feel sorrowful, if we feel angered, if we feel slighted, we've been taught, hey, don't spend too much time on that because it'll keep you from being productive in these other ways. But what we never realize is by never acknowledging and addressing those things, then we just become a person with bottled emotions ready to explode. And what normally happens is we explode on the person that didn't even deserve that explosion. Does that make sense? Right? And so this emotional self-analysis in writing images about specifically how we feel about our day and feel about things that happen to us really gets us in touch with who we are as well. Often we can be, one of the things, we are often surprised about our emotional reactions to things. And when we are surprised about our emotional reactions to things, we become embarrassed. And then when we become embarrassed, we either suppress or deny it, right? We all have an ego. the worst thing you can do is deny that you have an ego, right? What was Freud's number one thing? Freud says that if you suppress your intuitive self, it always manifests itself in some other worse or perverted form. So the worst thing you can do, I always tell young people, it's okay to feel bad, but don't feel bad about feeling bad, right? Right? And that's what we have to learn to do. And so this process of image journaling, by evaluating our emotions, by crafting the perfect image for it, it keeps us from feeling bad about feeling bad, which then allows us to focus on the actual thing, to focus on the actual emotion. And then what does that do? By fostering self-awareness, it really aids your sanity. Because the opposite of sanity being insane is a lack of self-awareness, right? If you really want to know what it means to be insane, it is to lack that aptitude to know who and what and where you are. And when you then become overwhelmed because you haven't precisely identified and articulated your emotions, then you become open or vulnerable to losing yourself. And that's why you have those outbursts, right? That's why you have those moments of outbursts. And again, as I say, generally toward the very people who deserve it the least, right? It's usually a spouse or a family member or a best friend. It's rarely the idiot at our job who gets that outburst, right? It's often rarely the person who caused the initial hurt and pain or whatever it is that we're suffering. So with that, I'm now going to give you a couple. I'm going to give you some bad moments and some good moments. And these are drafted around teaching at a college. And so I'm going to show you, we're going to go through, we're going to read, we'll have you guys read 4 images that I wrote reacting to bad moments and how I use image journaling to address those. And then we'll do good ones, right? So let me get someone to read and what I want to do with these images is, I want to have one person read them. And then I want to have everyone tell me, what do you think this image is trying to paint, right? I'm sure it will be very, self-explanatory. So let me get someone to unmute themselves and read the first image that begins administrators.
Am I unmuted?
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. Administrators are vampires, sucking dollars from warm bodies as they pass policies that poison the process of enlightenment.
So that's the image of something, of an emotion that I was dealing with that semester. And so what do you guys think? Tell me, what's your visceral reaction to that emotion? What do you think that I'm saying in that image? And what am I struggling? Anybody?
I think you're struggling with the rules and basically with administrators, they're following a set of information that's given down to all the policies. And sometimes the policies lack humanity. When I had a student who was suffering mental health problems, they basically told me to ignore her.
Right.
And so it's the policies are to safeguard. For some of them, they feel it safeguards their structural their structures, which have a lot to be desired a great deal of the time.
That's perfect. That's perfect, right? Often these policies do the exact opposite of what they're supposed to be designed to do, right? You're passing these policies, often say that administrators are, a lot of times, if they were former teachers, they're teachers who've been gone from the battlefield so long, they have no idea of what's happening on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they're disseminating these policies, right? And so those of us on the battlefield are getting these policies that we know will cripple the process. So thank you very much, Doc. So let me get someone to read the second image. And then after you read that second image, we'll see, get someone to tell me, what do you think that one is addressing?
I'm drowning in the swampy sea, polluted by students' lack of accountability.
So anybody? And Miss Kimmy or anybody? What do you think is happening? What do you think as a instructor?
Well,
Go ahead.
It sounds like a lot of frustration because when students don't live up to their, to the expectations that you have, or that they should be, accountable to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's perfect. And it's about that drowning in the swampy sea has to deal with the image I'm trying to paint. There is, it's growing, it's expanding, right? That the further along we go, accountability is no longer something that we hold, right? And if you connect it to those administrators, right? So you have these unaccountable administrators and passing these policies that create unaccountable faculty and teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get to the next one. And that's going to be kind of simple. We'll go ahead and read that. Somebody read that third image and tell me what do you see there?
I'll do it. Why is my scale weighted with the excess of student excuses?
Okay.
And a lot of times that might have, I've had the student excuses with regard to being late, with regard to papers, I've had one student say the whole family was going on a trip, a vacation. And so they really needed to go on vacation in the middle of a semester. And they were determined. So what do you do when they miss a whole week?
And that's perfect. And what happens is, one of the things I found to happen is that we keep saying that young people are getting worse. And my argument is that the young people are getting worse. The adults are getting worse. Because what's happening is, what I tell people, my wife had 2 children when I met her, so I've raised 2 stepchildren. They were 8 and 9 when I met them. They're both in their 30s. My stepson is married, has a wonderful wife. I have a wonderful daughter-in-law. They have 2 great grandchildren. I tell my stepson and his wife all the time, just so you know, me and your mama only care about the grandchildren. We care a little for you. Really, all we wanted is for you to give us grandchildren. Both of y'all can go away. We really only want you to drop the grandchildren off, and you can just leave them at the door and you never have to come in, right? And what I tell people is that the job of a young person, and I want to say this clearly, the job of a young person is to complain. The job of an adult is to ignore the complaints and help the child do what needs to be done. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But I think that what happens is, the more we begin to treat young people like they're glass and like they're fragile, we are actually crippling them more with being able to engage life in a way that we know that this life doesn't necessarily care about them. But that goes back to that initial problem that I was having with the administrators and their faulty policies. So let me get someone to read the last image that I created for a bad moment of that semester, and then we'll discuss that one. And then I promise you we have some images of good stuff that actually happened that semester. And as I say, by the way, and I also say, no administrators were harmed in the crafting of these images, by the way. I always have to say that, especially when I'm doing this on the school, that no administrators were harmed in the crafting of these images. All right, somebody's going to read that last image.
I'll try one.
Okay.
I like this one. Bell bottoms, butterfly collars, phone books, VCRs, Walkmans, fax machines, floppy disks, and CDs are all on the island of misfit toys, welcoming the arrival of reading and critical thinking.
So, Ms. Dees, anyone tell me, what do y'all think that one? What am I trying to get at there?
I could be wrong, but it looks to me like you're going back and forth saying, wow, there used to be bell bottoms, now they're wearing them again. Butterfly collars, maybe again too. Phone books, nope, don't have those anymore. Don't have, maybe no more bell bottoms, no more butterfly collars. We do have VCRs, Walkman, fax machines, floppy disks, and CDs are all on the island of misfit toys. They could be misfit. It depends on how they're used. Welcoming the arrival of reading and critical thinking. Now, I'm thinking that you might say Those things, if they're used correctly, can definitely welcome the arrival of reading and critical thinking. If they're used in the proper way to help students, with all of their, maybe they might have a reading problem, perhaps they're dyslexic, perhaps they're audio dyslexic, visually everybody has to learn with these different ways, kinesthetic, audio, visual. So with what we have today, it should make it better and easier for students to learn, to read, to critically think. But again, goes back to your first statement. Why is that not happening?
And that's a really good interpretation of that. I'll tweak it just a moment. So just a bit. The key phrase is Island of Misfit Toys. And so with Island of Misfit Toys, you have to, there was if you remember, there was back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, when you had the Christmas specials, the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and all of those. So Island of Misfit Toys was one of the places in one of those Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Christmas specials where all of the old and broken toys would get sent to the Island of Misfit Toys. And then 30, 40 years later, with what was the toy Woody with Toy Story, they had a kind of similar take on the Island of Misfit Toys where old, broken, useless toys would all be sent away. And so what I found, and this was another dig at the administrators, is that many of those administrators, their lack or their reading and critical thinking abilities seem to have been at the Island of Misfit Toys with all these other things that did not exist. So I constantly found myself dealing with, we go back to this very first image, I would look at a lot of the policies that I was getting from these administrators, and I would say those policies all deserve to be where? On the Island of Misfit Toys, because that's a terrible idea, that's a terrible policy, right? And so what these images did for me is that it allowed me to vent in a way that for me as a poet and a short story writer who writes images anyway, that I was already doing, but they also allowed me to make sense of what I was thinking. It forced me to be very specific and precise and also concise, right? Because that's the most effective image is the epitome of what we say that the most effective writers can say in 7 lines what it takes the rest of us 14 lines to say. And so that's the other thing in image journaling. You're trying to create the most precise and concise image for the emotion that you are feeling, right? So now let's go to the good moments, because I promise you there were some good moments that semester as well. So let me get someone to read that first image and tell me, what do you think is happening? What is this image responding to a moment in that semester? Anybody, even if you read already, anybody who wants to do it.
I'll give it a try. Yeah, how about sunshine spreading over a new day as a student's ideas flower from the soil of diligence. It's very, very hopeful, very rewarding, very enthusiastic, and just pleased with the teaching element and the reception from the student to see this creativity.
Exactly. And the most important part of the image is the soil of diligence. As a teacher, we all love academic superstars, right? It's a joy to teach academic superstars. But I will tell you this, the greatest reward, and I'm so glad you used the word reward, the greatest reward that I've ever gotten as a teacher is for that student that spent half the semester struggling, working diligently, trying to get it again and again, and then finally, out of nowhere, that light bulb illuminates. That is the greatest feeling. I mean, I cannot tell you guys how many times I've been in my office with a student that has made 65 on one paper, 65 on another paper, 65 on the third paper, and then finally 85. And I've grabbed that paper and I've run down the hallway, knocking on my colleagues' doors like a madman. Look, right? And you know, after doing that 20-something years, they all knew what was going on. I cannot, there's not an amount of money for the reward. That's why I'm so glad you used that word reward, because that means that I'm doing something right with that image, that there's a reward to the plowing, the tilling of the soil. I always say that parenting and teaching is like being a farmer or a gardener. When I say that parenting and teaching is like being a farmer or a gardener, the crops may not blossom when we want them, but if we are true to the process of tilling the soil, planting the seed, watering the seed, nurturing the seed, if we are true to the process of gardening, true to the process of farming, eventually those crops will harvest. And so as teachers and parents, if we are true to the process of parenting and teaching, those crops, those young minds will eventually blossom. And that's what I'm trying to capture with that image. So thank you so much for using reward, because that lets me know that that's the image. All right, so let me get someone to unmute themselves and read that second image.
Students' request for a reading list is a shimmering sign that teaching is fertilizer. So the feeling is, it seems like a great sense of satisfaction because a student is trying to further their own education, not just relying on the teacher, and that is the fertilizer.
Thank you.
Fertilizer, yeah.
Thank you. I'm saying, and that's it, right? It's not just the request, but the request for the reading list, which means that the student is understanding that this educational process continues once they leave you. That's when you know you've done your job as a teacher. When the student leaves you knowing that this is a continuous process. Another way I put it is, I always say that parenting, a good parent doesn't take care of a child for the entirety of the child's life. A good parent teaches the child how to care for itself for the entirety of its life. So if you are still caring for your child in your child's 50s, you are a terrible parent. Now, I'm not saying that you won't help your child and you won't. People always say, well, I can help my child and I can do this, then. Yeah, you can. But let's be really clear that there should be some point. And I don't know if you guys, we used to have this nest, this in one of our older houses, this bird used to always build her nest right under our stoop there. And so every spring we would get new eggs hatching. And what I realized by watching that every spring is that at some point, the mother bird evicts the chicks from the nest. Like, you got to go, you're too big. And for those of y'all who may, remember your old club days, Miss Dodge, it's been a while since I've been to the club because I don't want to be the old dude at the club. But one of the things we used to say back then, and Dr. Me, you may remember this, they used to say, you ain't got to go, you ain't got to go home, but you got to get out of here. And so that act of knowing, and I think there's no greater reward for a parent than to know my child can fend for itself. And so that moment when the student asked me for a reading list, Mr. McInnis, can you give me a reading list? Again, just like that other image, that was for me. You could have knocked me over with a feather because I knew that student got it. And we won't belabor it. The next image is really just another way I wanted to arrange that second image. So it's a student's request for a reading list is a shimmering sign that young minds still desire to be fed. The change on that one is, remember I said that people act like the children have changed? No, it's not the children have changed. It's the adults have changed, right? What all this new technology and all these things have done is that it's allowed adults to act more like children longer in their life, right? What's the thing? 30 is the new 20 or 40 is the new 20. No. 40 is not the new 20. 40 is the same old 40, except that you 40 and stop trying to be 20 in the club with the young people. Now, I'm not saying to be decrepit, right? Don't walk around being decrepit. What I'm saying is that the other way that I was able to really analyze what I was feeling in that moment was when that student asked me for that reading list, it was refuting that we live with a young generation that doesn't desire to grow and learn. No, they desire to grow and learn. The question is, what are we as adults doing to foster the learning and growth in those young people? All right? So I'm gonna go to our second to last. So our outcomes, right? And so here we get to see that image journaling is an emotional scrapbook or photo album for my life. Seeing my emotions and ideas painted tangibly and vividly helps me to understand them. So just like with those of you who journal, you'll go back 10, 12, 15 years and you'll read your journals and you'll see where you were. Image journaling does the same thing. But because we're painting emotions, it becomes my emotional scrapbook to let me know what I was feeling, how I overcame it, how I got through it, and also if I face that again, how can I get through it in that same way? So let me get someone to unmute themselves and read under provides a balanced and positive perspective. Let me get someone to read that statement under provides a balanced and positive perspective.
I can. Through this process, image journaling has provided a snapshot of my semester's emotional lows and highs that enables me to have a more balanced understanding of the semester, which functions to encourage me rather than discourage me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Flower. And what I was able to do, notice I did both good and bad moments. The reason that was important for me to do is people tend to be divided into two things. You're either a person who remembers all the good things, or you're a person who remembers all the bad things. And I will admit, and my wife called me on something. She made me realize that. Because on the one hand, I will say that every relationship that I had that ended in my life was because of me. I was the person that couldn't get it together in the relationship, right? I'll admit that I had a lot of growing to get to being with my wife, somebody now I've been with since 1991. But she said, did you know in the same time you say that, if I ask you about any of your old relationships, all you discuss are the bad things. I was like, wow. And she asked me, she said, can you name at least 3 good things from every relationship you had prior to me? And what that made me realize was I tend to be a person that when I move from relationships, and I don't know if it was for self-protection or, I would remember the bad things and go, okay, that's why that relationship ended. And so being conscious about writing both images about good things and bad moments, good and bad moments, it allowed me to have a more balanced feeling about the semester. And so I was able to leave the semester not thinking that was a bad or horrible semester because I had an actual scrapbook, a photo book of images that chronicled everything. Let me get someone to read the next one from Keeps Me From Overreacting. Anybody, even someone who's read before.
Okay. Keeps me from overreacting. Moreover, I learned not to overreact to a particular negative while also learning more about the things that impact me negatively and learning how to react to them in a more constructive manner.
That's that balance, right? When you have the balance, you tend not to overreact. But then also, because if we return to, we say that image journaling is ultimately about critical thinking. Like, why is it about critical thinking? Because you have to analyze your emotion to craft the perfect, right, image. As you are analyzing that emotion, I found that when people think about their emotions, they are less prone to react in a negative way. And so image journaling has really helped me not to be the person to send the email that you wish you didn't send, right? You know, you don't want to be the person to send the email to the administrator or to the student, and then once you send that email to the administrator or the student, you go, yep, that's a fireable offense there, so let me go ahead and go to HR, because that's what's going to happen. So that was one of the ultimate things for me. Now the end, let's now go and create some images. And so I'm going to give you guys a prompt, and I'm going to give you, so I'm going to let Ms. Dana tell me, is what is it, 2 minutes, 3 minutes? How long for the prompt? What I want to give you, I want you to give me a prompt of something that happened to you today, a good or bad emotion. And I want you to write an image. I want you to craft an image just about that emotion or the thing that caused that emotion. It could be a good emotion, it could be a bad emotion. And so how long do we want to give them, Ms. Dana? 3 minutes, 4 minutes? What's the usual time? And let me stop my share. So how long do we want to give them?
So say again what we're gonna do. What are we doing?
So you're going to think about something that happened today and how it impacted you emotionally, either a good emotion or a bad emotion. And I want you to write the image of that emotion. I want you to write the image describing either that good emotion or the image describing that bad emotion. How long we want to give? 3 minutes?
Let's try it.
All right,
Okay,
so
so
I'm going to, hold on. Let me get my clock, my timer here. And I'm going to, then I'm going to stop so I'm hitting my timer, then I'm going to start recording. So you have 3 minutes starting now.